And thanks everyone for attending today. Yes, again, today's topic is simplifying BOM integration with an ERP, MRP, or PLM system, really any business system. So again, just the basic idea of this is you've got an engineering bill of materials that has been derived in some fashion, say from a CAD application or via working in some sort of PDM system like Autodesk Vault. And you need to get that bill of materials communicated outside of engineering to the rest of the business. So we're going to talk a little bit about the methods of BOM integration with other systems. We'll then take a step back and talk a little bit about the methods people most commonly use if they're transferring BOMs normally, to maybe help you get a sense of where your current process is compared to maybe where it could be. And I mean, everyone who does BOMs has some sort of process, right, to specify a BOM and get it transferred to people who need to use it to buy things, make things, etc. So we'll be talking about the ways people manually transfer these bills of material. We'll then move on to talk a little bit briefly about the benefits of automating bill of materials transfer, via integration with some other system. Usually the benefits are pretty self-evident, right? It's pretty obvious if you work with BOMs at all and communicating BOMs where the problems are and what problems should be solved, but just so we're all on the same page with the benefits. We'll then move on to a discussion of the methods commonly used for automating bill of materials transfer and the parts, of a process. And then we'll finish up with a discussion of Hagerman's approach to bill of materials integration. And part of the reason we're even here today is because we developed a new process that may or may not be unique in the world, but based on our years of experience doing this and talking with a lot of our customers, we really want to simplify the idea of getting that bill of materials to the rest of the business more efficiently through integration. And so rather than thinking of this as a monumental task that is always something that should be done later, it's really something you should consider doing sooner rather than later, and that it really, depending on your needs, isn't really that complicated or difficult. So we'll get into our philosophy there. So that's what the next, say, 30 to 45 minutes will entail. So let's talk a little bit about the types of BOM integration. So in other words, what I mean by integration is taking a bill of materials that you have in some form, again, often derived from a CAD application like Autodesk Inventor, or created or manipulated in a PDM software like Autodesk Vault Professional, and getting that bill of materials to the rest of the business in some fashion, usually via entering into an ERP or a PLM system. And I think of it as sort of two fundamentally different types, what I call discrete and real time. So discrete is a push of information. It's sort of a one-time thing, or one time per release. You, from the source to the destination, you say this information needs to go, and it goes to that other system, a one-off kind of thing. A lot of times it's just one way from your PDM system or from your CAD system to your ERP system. And it's triggered in some way. Either a user pushes a button, or there's some sort of scheduled task that periodically looks for new releases in your PDM system and pushes them over, or some process within your PDM system, like a state change in Autodesk Vault. So discrete is some event pushes information, and that's that, right? So the other is what I would call real-time, a real-time integration. So meaning the connection between these business systems is live. Um, and the reasons you might do that often is, let's say you need to pull part numbers from your ERP system. When you make a new component in Inventor, or when you make an item in Vault Pro, maybe you need a part number, and all part numbers, no matter what, have to come from ERP. It would be nice if you could say, I'm making a new part, I want this eventually to go on a BOM, give me a new part number to use so I don't have to go to my ERP system, create a part there, copy its part number, paste it over, right? So this real-time integration could be helpful in that regard. Another common feature of this real-time integration of bill of materials is being able to look at a bill of materials in your source system. So say, like I'm going to call over here a bill of materials dialog from Autodesk Inventor, and compare the bill of materials that you see on this list with maybe something that already exists in ERP. Or if it doesn't exist in ERP, like this specific part number, like 100, 200, many of these parts might already exist. If you say do configure to order, engineer to order, and you're sort of, for a new project, you're putting together existing pieces, this is where you could compare your current bill of materials information to your ERP's information and see any problems, issues, et cetera, and kind of make sure your BOM is all ready to go. And then maybe you, at that point, push it, right? But you sort of have this real-time connection, where you can either compare bill of materials or look up a part number if you need to, right from within, say, your CAD system. And another common real-time, activity is I've got to do a change order. I've got a change order in my ERP system. I need to, add some information to it or pull some information from it, say in Vault or down to my Rev block in Inventor. Basically just giving you sort of a window into your ERP system from within whatever CAD system, right? So those are, to me, the two different types. The discrete, you're pushing information and it just goes, or you're interacting with that other business system, that ERP system from within, say, your CAD environment or your PDM environment, right? And there are pros and cons to both of these approaches, right? So a real-time connection can be fantastic, right? You get immediate feedback. Is my BOM accurate? Or do I have any issues with my current information? I can pull a part number without doing a bunch of extra steps, right? So that's good. Discrete is simple, right? And it can be 100% transparent to the end user. As long as I've done my due diligence when creating my BOM, and everything looks good, I know, you could have rules in your PDM system to make sure that, properties are correct and whatnot. I just go about my normal work, and when I'm done with my normal process, say when I release my assembly in Vault, the BOM just goes somewhere and I don't have to do anything else or worry about it, right? So that can be very good. Now, real-time connections, while great and very useful in a lot of cases, they can be very complex, right? In any sort of integration, there's always what I would call middleware, right? Some piece of technology, software, a rule set, something in between the source system for your bill of materials, say CAD or Vault, and your destination, right? So there's some middleware. But when you're talking about a real-time connection between two systems, that middleware can get pretty complex. And you might even need some sort of client-side customization. So again, if we look at an Inventor bill of materials window, there's nothing built into this dialog that would say, okay, connect to my ERP system and show me the BOM in ERP so I can compare. So you usually have some sort of client-side add-in, like the add-in for Inventor or add-in for Vault that lets you do those sort of comparisons and lookups, right? So that means you're installing software on client computers, right? So a real-time environment is much more complex overall, which, again, in my experience, the simpler you can leave your client-side deployment, and the fewer customizations and extra tools you have to use, the better, right? Now, discrete, in my mind, the biggest downside with that is problem solving is reactive versus proactive. So if I can't look at a BOM in CAD and a BOM in ERP together and compare them, I could miss some problems, right? So that's a downside. I would say it's not a very big downside in my experience. We have a lot of customers who sort of use this method of discrete push of data or extraction of data. And in reality, it's typically not a big problem, especially depending on your ERP system and how you work, right? So, and that's because in a lot of cases, a BOM is released, and once it's released, it often undergoes little or no change over time. Now, that's not always true, but if you've got 100 rows on a BOM and you've released a project and it's being built, one or two things might change here or there, but most of the items on the BOM aren't going to change over time. And so often a push one time at the beginning of a project or one time at the start of a new rev is good enough, right? And it can still save a huge amount of time and trouble. And again, that's because a lot of ERP systems that I've seen and worked with, whenever you make a new rev, you're essentially, you either have to or can just push what is essentially a whole new bill of materials that describes that revision. And any sort of comparison or anything like that, the ERP system handles, okay, well, here's what Rev 1 was, and here's, all of the part numbers, et cetera, and here's Rev 2. And the same for information for any new rev. If you're adding a part, well, if you make an API call to say, here's Rev 3 of this part, it updates the part versus making a new one, right? I would say discrete accommodates a lot of different types of workflows too, depending on how you want to work. And frankly, if you have ever taken a bill of materials and it has gone into an ERP system, you're technically already doing what would be required by a discrete BOM transfer process integration. You're just doing everything manually, right? Now, again, the real-time integration is great if you need it. And I'll say after talking to dozens of companies over the last few years, more and more about this topic, most people don't really need this. It would be really nice to have, but in reality, it's not strictly necessary. And that's good because compared to discrete, a real-time, system integration can easily be 10 times more expensive, both to deploy initially and to maintain. It's just generally a lot more complex. Right. So again, we've got these two different types, discrete, real-time. The rest of our presentation is largely going to focus on the method of discrete because that's what we see most of our customers can benefit from, and what is the most straightforward to implement. And it's definitely the kind of thing that you could start implementing, discrete integration. And then if you need to graduate to more real time, you've got at least some buy-in through the rest of the business that this concept of automating BOM transfer is worth it. It's worth some level of effort, and then it's just incremental effort to go, to something more integrated. So, but let's talk a little bit now about how many of you might be doing your bills of material today. So, manual methods of BOM transfer. And I would say 5 to 10 years ago, this was by far the most common. I think it's getting less and less common today, but I think a lot of people still do it, is you produce a drawing, there's a parts list on that drawing, and then someone goes through the parts list and types stuff into your ERP system, right? So for example, I've got a drawing here, an assembly drawing with several pages. There's a parts list over here in the corner. And so someone will take this PDF or even a piece of paper, and we'll look at this list and just start typing stuff in, right? They'll go to ERP and type. And that can work, right? But it's not the most efficient, and there are inherent issues with that, which we'll get into in a little bit. All right, so method number 2, which I think more and more people are doing these days, is you'll commonly export the bill of materials to Excel, at which point then maybe someone will take the spreadsheet and enter it into ERP, right? So you might take your Inventor bill of materials like this and export, right, out to, whatever method you want, to an Excel sheet, right? And then from Excel, what you might often do is, here's my Excel sheet, and then I've got another spreadsheet over here that's got part numbers that I use frequently. And, there's a lot of copy and paste. Like, okay, I know I need these parts over on this page maybe, and, this other spreadsheet over here has got some other parts that I need. So I go looking through my documents folder and find that spreadsheet. I'm looking around for data. I'm copying and pasting and maybe like changing numbers here to get them all worked out, inserting rows, right? There's a lot of manual manipulation of this spreadsheet to get it right? And then you send that spreadsheet to somebody and then they do something with it. Maybe they go through and retype every one of these things, right? Now, I would say the third common method, which is not super common in my experience, at least talking with a lot of our customers, is maybe taking this Excel sheet, or maybe even a direct export or a CSV file or a CS file from Autodesk Vault, and going through some steps in your business system, ERP or PLM, to do like an import, right? So you've got some process here where, okay, I'm going to create an import. I want to import, some items, and I need to pick a file for that, right? There's several steps. It may be complex. You have potentially lots of choices to make, and you're dragging columns around and pushing a lot of buttons. And that also means that your source data, like your spreadsheet's got to be exactly right, or your ERP system is going to reject it. And now you're cleaning stuff up in the spreadsheet. So this third method can be efficient for sure, but there's still some issues with it, right? So just to sort of reiterate these guys, if you start with your parts list, if that's how you're doing it today, you're taking a parts list and you're typing stuff in here, I would say that's the least efficient and sophisticated. It's either the most common or probably the second most common method that I see our customers using. And that's the most effort usually to get the BOM complete and put it into ERP, because someone is taking this parts list. Maybe you're in Inventor in the drawing, and you're modifying your parts list. So you come over here and edit parts list, and now you're adding rows to this and typing things in, and all the data is static and overridden, and you're losing a lot of potential if you follow this very manual workflow. Export to Excel is, again, a lot more common these days, especially with Inventor. Typically you don't draw everything that needs to go on to the bill of materials, and so you're maybe starting here in Inventor, you're getting it out to Excel, and then again you're adding rows, you're copying, you're pasting, you're typing stuff in, right? There may be some macros in your workbook to help validate data, or say adjust quantities. Say we always add 5% to the number of fasteners we specify because we're shipping something to a work site and things get lost. Right. And I would say it's a little better than the typing in of the data from a drawing, but it's not the greatest. And then that third method, importing into ERP manually, meaning starting with a spreadsheet or a CSV file and pressing some buttons in ERP, and in comes the BOM, right? that BOM may or may not be done when you import it, right? You may need to manipulate it further. You may need to add quantities as you go or have some rules in your ERP system, right? And usually this requires some sort of transformation to get from, say, the raw output from something like Inventor, if nothing else, to make sure your columns are in the right order, that, maybe data types are specified correctly, because maybe if it's an Excel sheet and your ERP system's expecting a certain data type, like your quantities have to be integers, or, your part numbers have to be strings. And if your part numbers are numeric, then, there's transformation and validation still has to go on somewhere, right? So again, these three methods, I think, are the most common. And I'd like to ask a question now. So I'm going to put up the first of two poll questions we have today. Which method describes your current bill of materials transfer workflow? So meaning, how do you get a bill of materials from engineering into ERP or PLM? Right. So if you could just we'll give everyone just a little bit of time here to answer this question, just to see where we are, on this hierarchy. Because, my thought was export to spreadsheet and parts list on a drawing were probably pretty close in terms of what people do. That was my sort of anecdotal guess based on just talking with companies over time. We have a pretty decent sized group here today. I thank you all for attending. So it'll be interesting to see how the numbers wash out. Okay, we're just going to give it just another few seconds here because I still see a few votes coming in. And it looks like I was partially right. So we're going to go ahead and close up the poll, right? And we'll just go ahead and put the results up here. So what we can see is, I knew a lot of people used parts lists on a drawing and type it into ERP. I didn't think it would be quite that many. I thought there would be a closer split between parts lists and spreadsheets that get provided, just because a lot of times you got to do stuff to add BOMs. It's interesting to see how many people currently export to Excel and then import into their ERP. That's a little more than I thought. I think what's great about that is you are really close to the point where you could automate your process. If you can get your BOM a little more complete on the front end, then there's a real possibility you can take one small step to not have to do that. Export to Excel and then import into ERP. So thank you all. I really appreciate you participating in that poll. So let's talk about the benefits of maybe fully automating this process, especially for those of you that are just providing a drawing or just shipping a spreadsheet. What's the benefit? Why should you consider fully automating this? Well, the biggest one is reducing errors and mistakes, right? This is, aside from the effort required to get to the BOM in the first place, which, depending on the complexity of your BOMs and how big your assemblies are, I mean, in jobs past, it's been maybe sometimes a couple of days to get to the point where the bill of materials is complete and we're comfortable with it, right? For just like one project. And I'm sure some larger projects, it could be several days to get everything sorted out, right? And so if you spend all that time, and if you've got dozens or hundreds of rows in your BOM, turning that over to someone who's going to literally look at that data and maybe even just look at it off of a PDF, or maybe best case, copy data from a PDF, copy, paste so they don't mistype anything. That's a lot of time spent, looking at this thing, copying and pasting or retyping. Every keystroke is an opportunity for a mistake. And when we're talking about bills of material, those mistakes can get expensive, right? What happens if, transposing two numbers in a part number of something you're buying, leads to the wrong part coming in, and oh, there's a 3-month lead time on that. We know supply chain is still snarled in a lot of places. So what does that cost if your project's now 3 months delayed because the wrong part came in? What if, you mistype a quantity and there's, you've made 5 of something when you really needed 1. Can you reuse that material in some way? Is it now just scrapped? If your BOMs have things like stock sizes and someone uses that to order from, maybe you've ordered a bunch of the wrong stock size and you're either carrying inventory that you don't need, or maybe, who knows? It's a lot can go wrong when you're retyping data. Aside from that, though, sort of a secondary benefit is eliminating redundant tasks. Again, an engineer already spent a bunch of time getting this BOM right. Why then have someone go through and essentially type all that in and having to revalidate what they typed? Somebody already did that. Why do it again, right? It's my philosophy. Any piece of information related to one of your designs in a perfect world would be entered one time by the person who owns that information, and that data flows through the rest of the process without ever being typed in again, right? In a perfect world, that would be the case. But then even like a tertiary benefit would be making sure this stuff gets delivered when it's supposed to, the BOM goes to who it goes, who needs it when they need it, and also reducing non-value added tasks. You ship a BOM, somebody looks at it, they have questions, they come and bother you, it stops your flow. I mean, personally, in my world, that's one of the biggest hindrances is I'm in the middle of something and then a question pops up. And I've got to address it right away because like maybe they've got to get this part on order and now there's a question because maybe there's a spelling mistake or, did you really mean this? Or somebody printed out this hard copy and some coffee got spilled on it. So now I can't read this. Can you tell me what that part number really is? Right? Who knows? Just all the things that pop up throughout the day that draw your focus away from what you really need to be doing. So, I think anyone who's had to deal with BOMs is probably familiar with all of these typos, just the frustration of having to do things twice, getting interrupted when you're in the middle of something important, right? So let's talk about the process of automating BOMs, what that means, to give you a sense of what's involved and, really, I think to break it down to show you how straightforward it can be in a lot of cases. Now, not everyone can benefit from a simple, straightforward, discrete BOM push, right? So that's something we can always talk with you about, review your process and your needs, and give you some consultation about whether a straightforward BOM push would be a benefit to you, or if you need something more complex, because we can deliver more complex things as well, right? But our goal is to help as many of our customers as we can in the best way possible. And a lot of times keeping it simple is the right way to go. So I think of pushing BOMs, and I think this would generally go for just about any bit of data you've got to push from one system to another in 3 steps. You've got to extract the data from the source system. There's typically some transformation or validation. You got to do something to that data to make sure it's in the right format for the destination system, and then you've got to deliver that data, right? Now, because of this, and because there's so many different business systems out there, there's always going to be some middleware involved. Middleware meaning some piece of software, that's in between the source system and the destination system that does this transformation, validation, and all the communications, right? And not just because there are so many different business systems out there, but because every company's needs are unique. Everyone uses different properties, metadata associated with their parts. They have different part numbering schemes. They have different needs when they want to validate their data, different rule sets, right? So this middleware has typically some level of business logic built in this transformation and validation step, right? And while every company's needs are unique, there are a lot of commonalities, right? If we're talking about manufacturing, we have part numbers, we have descriptions, we have titles, right? We're dealing with quantities and raw materials. There are a lot of commonalities that can be leveraged by a system integrator that has experience, right? We've seen this 5 times before. We did it just like this. We can help you get there, right? That reduces risk in a project. It makes everybody feel more comfortable with it, and it ultimately leads to a better outcome, right? So just to briefly talk about each of these steps in a little more detail, the extraction, that might be directly from CAD software, like from Inventor. It might be from a PDM system like Autodesk Vault, not Autodesk Inventor, right? And that extraction could be from, in Vault's case, Vault Professional has this concept of the item master, which is essentially bills of material, just captured inside the Vault here, right? And so when we're talking about extracting data from something like Vault, we can extract the bill of materials here directly if it's captured in the system, or we can go down all the way to the file level. And if it's something like Inventor, we can extract the bill of materials data from the files themselves. So that's a big hurdle that, a lot of people might think, well, we can't integrate our BOMs. We use Vault. We don't use items. Since we don't have bills in Vault, there's no way to integrate. That's not true. We can go right down to the file level if we need to. Right? I will say extracting the BOM data from, if we're talking about Vault specifically, extracting the BOM data from the item master is the most straightforward way to integrate, specifically in the Autodesk world. Another benefit of using the items in Vault Professional is it gives you an opportunity to get more easily to a complete engineering bill of materials by fleshing out these bills of material in Vault versus, say, having to use Inventor functionality like virtual components or empty part files to make a BOM complete in Inventor. Vault has some huge benefits, and we've got I've done past webcasts about that. If you're interested, we can get you some information about that too. So the extraction step is, where does the data come from? And it's usually going to be CAD or a PDM system in this case, whatever PDM system engineering is using. Transformation is what the middleware does, right? Typically, the source data isn't exactly in the format that is needed by the destination system, right? Maybe your descriptions or some discretionary data in your PDM system can be 1,000 characters long, but in your PLM or ERP system, maybe that feels limited to 40 characters. And so, you decide, well, we just want a little bit of information there, just take the first 40 characters, right? So truncating text fields, or say we want to add 5% to our number of fasteners to make sure there are plenty on the job site. Calculating derived fields, like, okay, we've got our assembly, we know what everything weighs. We also, at the top level of the assembly or for every sub-assembly, we need to also specify its total weight. And if you can't extract that from your CAD system, or you need it in a different format, like sometimes our engineers, they don't change the units in their files, and we need to make sure that it's always in kilograms or pounds, right? Little things like that. And even it could even get as complex as restructuring bills of material. We have phantom assemblies, or we have, say, inseparable assemblies in Inventor, and the way Inventor does things, we end up with a few extra pieces on our BOM. We want to make sure those pieces don't come out in ERP, right? Well, you can add some rules to your transformation that make sure the right parts are where they need to be. And I would argue, so in terms of validation, any automation can always benefit from some sort of validation, right? Double check that every part number is in the correct format, or that if you've got a property that's, needs to be a specific from a member, like a list of values, like a manufacturing method, like, are we bending this? Are we lasering it? Making sure that if someone typed in some data somewhere, that they typed it in right. and either correct it if you can, or flag it and say, I can't add this to the destination system because it's not right. Here's the specific problem, fix it and try again, right? Right, so we've got extraction, which we can do in a few different ways, transformation, which is an important step, and that's always a little bit custom, and then delivery. Where does this go, and how do we get it there? And where does it go is usually an ERP or a PLM or an MRP system. The way you get it there are a lot of different ways to communicate with, these kind of systems. There are three of the three most common that I've encountered, and this encompasses anecdotally at least 90%, if not more, of the companies I've talked to. You can say export to a CSV file or an Excel file, and then your ERP system might be watching a folder on the network. And if it sees that CSV file laying in a folder, it says, oh, I've got some data, and it just sucks it in. Right? It could be direct update of a database. This is pretty rare, but in some cases I've done it, especially if some other middleware is involved. You might need to write this data directly to some database like SQL Server. And a really common one these days, because so many people are moving things to the cloud and cloud-based systems, is communicating directly with an ERP system via its API. Often what we would call a REST API. Maybe it's a .NET API. In some rare cases with really older systems, or maybe it's like a C++ API or something. Right, but this is becoming more and more common, is communicating with the system directly. This is, I think, the most complex because you have to understand that system's API, but it also can be the most powerful and the most useful. Right. So let's talk a little bit now about Hagerman's approach to BOM integration. So we've talked about the benefits, we've seen how you might do things manually. Let's talk a little bit now about Hagerman's approach to integrating bills of material between your CAD environment and your PLM or ERP. So I would argue most companies would find value in automating this. In some cases, when your BOMs are small and infrequent, it's not worth it. But if you're producing BOMs on a regular basis and they end up with even just dozens of rows, you probably find some benefit in automating this process. That said, a lot of companies that we talk to, they say, well, we'd like to do this eventually, but it seems like such a difficult and complicated task that we're not ready for it yet, right? And I would argue, depending on the business systems that you use and your current engineering workflows, you may be a lot closer to doing that than you think, right? And we'd love to talk to you about where you are, and if you're not ready for it, how you can get there, right? Because this can be such a huge benefit. We're hearing about it all the time. I mean, there are 90 plus people watching right now because it's an important topic, right? So our approach is, we know, especially in the Autodesk world, that's what we focus on. We know the Autodesk products and their APIs, right? We have executed many projects in the past like this, BOM integrations, taking data from Autodesk Vault or Autodesk Inventor and getting it into some other business system. We've got experience doing that. Extraction of bills of material from Inventor or Vault, I would argue, based on my experience, if you know what you're doing, it's a straightforward and well understood process. Getting that data out is straightforward, right? And depending on what you need, in a lot of cases, there's low cost, off the shelf software that can play most of the role of this middleware that's required, right? Especially for Vault. Surprisingly low annual software cost can get you a lot of benefit, right? So what in the past you might have spent, $10,000, $20,000 annually on a piece of software just to get data from, say, Vault to ERP, your annual cost could be significantly less than that, depending on how things work out, right? So we know the Autodesk side, we know how that works. And so the unknowns are really related to the specific destination system and what sort of transformation and validation you have to do. But even these unknowns typically have some limit in terms of complexity, right? You're either writing to a file, or you're writing to a database, or you're interacting with a REST API or using a .NET API in most cases, right? And often there's not a lot of transformation or validation required. There's usually the same kind of thing, and it's usually pretty straightforward. As long as you understand the rules, you can code those rules into the middleware, and you're really removing a ton of extra work from the process, right? So we have knowns, and even the unknowns that we recognize are generally pretty common. So we've got our second poll question here. And you may or may not know the answers to this. I thought I would just throw the question out there, so I'm going to go ahead and put it up. Curious, what kind of ERP or PLM system do you use? And mostly the way I've couched this is not what specific ERP system, like is it Epicor or Made to Manage, visual manufacturing, something like that. But if you know, and basically, is it an on-premise or is it cloud-based? That's what I'm really curious. And if you happen to know what type of API it uses, a lot of people don't know what kind of API their ERP system will use. So if you know, we can share that. That's great. Cloud-based is almost always going to have some sort of REST API available. So I'm really curious just to see here if you know, and we want to get a sense of what people have. Give it just another few seconds here. We have a couple more votes coming in. Okay, so let's go ahead and close it up here. And just to share, so everybody can get a sense, can see here, it looks like about half of you are using an on-premise off-the-shelf, which is pretty common. Not quite as many cloud-based as I thought. And then this number is probably right, a proprietary sort of homegrown ERP system. We run into that. That number makes sense to me, and from my anecdotal experience, I would say is, there's a good percentage, but not a lot of people who have something that's just sort of built up over time. And one of the nice things about a proprietary system is you hold the keys, assuming you have access to the source code or whoever maintains it for you. There's a lot you can do if you have your own proprietary system, right? So that's definitely not necessarily an impediment to integration, right? So again, just to summarize our approach, source, take data from the source, you transform and validate it, send it to its destination, right? In our case, that can be Inventor, Autodesk Vault. If you're using Autodesk Vault, then that could mean Inventor data. It could mean AutoCAD electrical data, because Vault can extract AutoCAD electrical data. It could even mean SolidWorks, right? Vault can understand Inventor data, BOM data, AutoCAD electrical BOM data, SolidWorks BOM data, even combine them all together. So, in terms of the middleware, it's transparent what software it came from. Now, AutoCAD, vanilla AutoCAD is typically not a great, target as a source, because an AutoCAD file, vanilla AutoCAD file can't really capture a bill of materials. Maybe if you're using something like tables on a drawing, and you're extremely consistent with the contents of those tables, then maybe you can read it. Or if you do things like use blocks with information, we've done that with some customers in the past. AutoCAD, it's very hit or miss, and it's very dependent on you being consistent in the way you draw. Inventor, AutoCAD electrical, SolidWorks, they have defined ways of using the software that more commonly lead to a bill of materials without having to be so perfect in execution, right? And again, we know how to extract data from these environments. The transformation validation step, it's unknown, but there are usually limits to its complexity. And a lot of times, if you use Vault or your CAD software in the right way and configure things in the right way, you can further limit that complexity that's required in your transformation and validation steps, like making sure that before you can release an assembly in Vault, that you have a description property, right? Vault's doing your validation in that case, not your middleware, right? And then the destination system, while there are lots of different systems, the methods of communication are consistent. Exporting to a file, which is extremely straightforward. If your system can auto ingest, you could get bill of material automation for, I think, shockingly simple and low cost project. Direct database update is usually straightforward as long as you know what tables need to be updated. REST or .NET API calls are usually the most complex, but again, if we can work with your ERP vendor to understand the API calls that are necessary, it's very low risk, right? And our approach here is because we know the extraction so well, we can provide what is essentially, here's a set of tasks that are always performed for the extraction, and we know what that's cost, that lowers risk, right? And the rest of a project that we would execute, in terms of like how we would bill you or how you would pay us for this or what it would cost, a portion is fixed and understood, lowering risk of the project overall. The rest of it is estimated, but based on very well informed pre-sales discussions and our experience, right? So the benefit of our approach, we can solve your most pressing BOM communications issues without overcomplicating the solution, and reduce risk by reducing the complexity, using built-in software capabilities and off-the-shelf software wherever possible, and leveraging our existing experience, and in the case of your off-the-shelf ERP or your homegrown ERP, the resources you already have that maintain and implemented your ERP, short discussions with them to understand how to communicate, right? Right. Now, this approach isn't for everyone. Do you use Inventor or Vault? If so, then yeah, they could be, right? When you're using Inventor, are your CAD bills of material mostly complete or fully complete, right? Do you end up having to add a lot of pieces, right? If they're not 100%, which is common, do you have a lot of extra parts to add to get to a complete engineering BOM? That's where Vault can come into play and help with that. And I think most importantly, is all of the data you need to communicate to ERP, is it present in the CAD model or in your Vault? Or do you spend a lot of time, say, if you export to Excel, do you spend a lot of time adding information to it that's not already in CAD, right? If you do that, you might need to change your upfront workflows to make sure things like your descriptions and titles and stock numbers and such are on the CAD data or in Vault, not added after the fact, right? But we can certainly help you, right? We're more than willing to talk with you about your current process and your needs, and help you understand the process and if this process would be right for you, right? Now that's on the extraction side. On the delivery side, are you using an ERP system that is integration friendly, right? Does it have an API? Is it a modern API? Can it automatically ingest a CSV or an Excel file, right? So again, and we can help you understand that, help you know what questions you might need to ask of IT or your integrate or your implementer to understand what that is. And do you have resources available that understand your ERP system's API, right? Because there are too many systems for us to know everything, and even within a given system, implementations can be unique. And so in most of these projects in this phase, we'll need to work with your existing resources that know your ERP system to understand how they want us to communicate with it, right? So we would need to talk to those people as well. And we are getting a little bit, we're close to the top of the hour. We've gone on a little longer than I thought we might. Just want to give you two really quick examples of integration. It's not real fancy to look at, but here's an example of saving data to a file. So I have an Inventor assembly here. It's currently a work in progress. I'm done with the BOM. I've checked it in Inventor. It all looks good. Now I need to get that bill of materials out somewhere so ERP can bring it in. Well, if I bring up my handy little BOM folder, right? So I have a place on my network that has our BOM exports. And I know this is part number 100, 200. I've extracted a couple of times already. What you'll see is just by changing the state of this from work in progress to released, behind the scenes, in this case using Cool Orange Power Jobs, something's going to happen. Some jobs are going to go into a queue, and you can see over here, it's creating a DWF, and then here, once that DWF is done, it's going to do a whole bunch of little calculations, and then it's going to spit out into this folder a new bill of materials. Right? So just like that, we have a bill of materials in Excel automatically. Right? So that's one method, right? Just spitting out to a file. Now another method might be, say, from the Vault Item Master. We have a bill of materials here. We need to get it into our PLM system, say Fusion Manage in this case, for as an example, right? So I've got a special state here to trigger the upload. And again, a process can run, right? And what can happen then is in my Fusion Manage environment, right now the BOM is uploading. You can see in the process here, we're actually creating these items in Fusion Manage and bringing it up. So our part number here was what? 1 with a bunch of zeros and 13, right? So we're just searching. We got a lot of, oh, there's a lot of stuff here. I know where this is supposed to go, so I'm going to go to that workspace and refine my search a little bit here. So there we go, this guy right here. So this one just got uploaded. Notice its bill of materials is here. Any related attachments. And in this case, I could even go right to, say, the Vault Thin client on premise here. And if it doesn't freak out on me, like the Thin client sometimes does, I can go right to that page in my Vault. Right. So again, not super fancy because it's not supposed to be. We're talking about direct integration, discrete, where I just do something in my Vault and magically a few seconds later, we've got data in our PLM system. We've got a spreadsheet that's come out, you know, to import into ERP, right? And we didn't have to do anything on the engineering side other than our day-to-day work. Right? So again, just to summarize here, I think most companies would find value in automating the bill of materials transfer and communication process. Based on my conversations with our customers, a lot of people think it's complicated, expensive, some daunting big task. But depending on your situation, it can be very straightforward and provide very high ROI, right? And we've got the experience and an established process to help you reduce risk and maximize that ROI. So we're more than happy to talk to you about that, right? So on that note, as I leave you today, think a little bit about your current BOM process. You know, where are the holes in it? Where can it be improved? What does it cost you when you have mistakes or delays? There'll be a question in the survey at the end of this, asking if you'd like us to reach out to you. So if you want to talk to us about your BOM workflow, make sure and answer that question. I think it's question 2 on the list. Just say, yes, you want to talk to us, and we'll have someone reach out and we'll schedule some time to talk. And if you're watching this as a recording, which a lot of people do after the fact, just contact anyone here at Hagerman, you know, whoever you normally deal with on the sales side, or just call us up. and ask us to talk about BOM transfer workflows. Right. And that's it. We ran a bit longer than I thought. I tend to get a little wordy at times. We'll address some questions. A couple questions have come in here. Here's one from your experience, do customers extract from vaults or from the drawing parts list? That's a great question. I would say both. Extracting directly from the parts list on an Inventor drawing is rare if we're talking about automation, right? Because you need Inventor and you very specifically have to know on the drawing, which sheet is it on? Is there only one parts list? Through the Vault Inventor API, I should say, you can query the drawing and find parts lists and get this data out. And I have done that before. I would say generally that's pretty rare, but doable. More often, you would start with an assembly and extract this bill of materials from the assembly, which is different from a parts list. I would say right now, extraction of BOM data from Vault and its item master is probably the most rare, just because a lot of people do not use the item master in Vault. I have become a big fan of the item master over the last few years because of what it enables. So if you have Vault Professional and you're not using the item master and you're looking to improve your bill of materials workflow, you need to take a look at items to see if they can help, because there's a good chance that they can. So just to summarize again, do customers extract from Vault or from the drawing parts list? It can be either, depending on workflows. Another question, we are migrating towards NetSuite. Do you have any experience with BOM insertion into it? We do have some. I believe some experience was facilitating formatting for a manual import. We're working with another customer right now to potentially directly add. NetSuite does have a very extensive REST API. So yes, that would, as long as we understand your tenant, how it's configured, and what elements you use, which we would work with your NetSuite vendor to understand, then yes, we can integrate with NetSuite. And another question, how does this implementation that we're talking about, like our sort of discrete push, compare to PowerGate through Cool Orange? So PowerGate is more of this real-time. Well, we were talking about real-time, where you might have an interface in front of you to compare the bill of materials, or an interface floating around an Inventor where you could search for a part number to look for information, or pull a new part number, either in Inventor or in Vault. So PowerGate is that real-time integration. And that gets down to what I was talking about. When you have real-time integration, you typically need some sort of add-in for your CAD or your PDM system. There's a more complex middleware behind the scenes. There's web services that are always listening for either side to make a request and then pass it on to the other, right? So PowerGate is great software, but it's more this real-time integration. If you need a discrete push, if you're using Vault, we would still probably, in most cases, use a Cool Orange product, but it would be their Power Jobs product, where you can create custom jobs that do things. And most of our customers that use Power Jobs, and we have quite a few now, use it to do things like make PDFs or steps or DXFs. More and more of our customers are using it for discrete BOM push as well. Okay. Another question. Is it possible to have a hybrid discrete and real-time connection? Discrete for BOM updates, but real-time for part numbers pulling direct out of ERP? Absolutely. Now, if you have a real-time connection going on, a push is often just compare the BOMs and go, but and then push a button and then it pushes, right? But a real-time connection doesn't have to be all of these things either. If all you're looking to do is get part numbers, then there are other methods to do that. It could be a simple add-in for Vault or Inventor. Vault does technically now, Vault Professional has the ability to use a third-party source to give you part numbers. It's not trivial to implement, but it would be a lot easier than, say, implementing a full, say, an entire PowerGate implementation just to get part numbers is probably overkill. So there could be methods, if all you need to do is pull part numbers, to do that one little bit of communication to get a part number, and then the rest of it is a discrete push. So absolutely, yeah. So, and that's a really good question. I thank you for asking it. Real time versus discrete, it's not one or the other, all or nothing, right? If you need some sort of pull of data from your ERP system, but it's not something like a real-time BOM comparison, there are ways of doing that that are simpler than, say, really digging in and giving you a full window in. Just getting a part number could be simpler. All right, so it's been